Bungie's Marathon has reached the middle of its first season, and there's been so many changes that dramatically improve the experience of this game, especially for new and beginner players. And considering Marathon is currently on sale for 20% off, I want to give new players a complete strategy guide to maximize their gains in the early levels. Now, I'm currently level 80 with multiple days of in-game playtime under my belt, and I just did my first successful Cryo Archive Exfil. Cryo Archive being the final and most difficult map in the game, so I know these Marathon gameplay tips will be extremely valuable for new players, relapsed beginners, and even intermediate players who are struggling to find consistency on the endgame maps. Your first game of Marathon can be an overwhelming experience. The game immediately drops you into the map with environmental hazards everywhere, NPCs shooting at you from all sides, and asks you to exfil. It's a real shell shock, and it's actually pretty common for new players to fail this first round. So I want to establish 3 core principles before you even play your first match of Marathon, because these 3 principles illustrate the correct mentality for success in this game, and really, in all games of this nature, be them battle royales, extraction shooters, or even arena shooters based around power weapons like Halo. Principle number 1 of Marathon: the point is survival. Bungie may sell Marathon as a PvP focused game, and it certainly is. However, the point of every PvP game is to survive while your opponent perishes. This means creating disadvantages for your enemies before a fight even begins, and taking educated risks when going for those close quarter combat situations. I'll make further videos discussing best practices around positioning, loadouts, shell builds, strategies, and things of that nature in the future. But in the beginning, with small shields and baby loot, respect that a face-to-face battle can go either way, and the grace of this is that loot can be regained much quicker than many players think. And your goal in the beginning should just be gaining XP in fights, learning to get better in those PvP scenarios. Because if you don't gain the XP at a low level, you'll just be very inconsistent once you reach the high levels. With that in mind, let's address the real issue people have with extraction shooters and what really keeps them from improving. Even you watching this video, if you already play Marathon, I know you suffer from this: gear fear, because I also suffer from this a bit. And this leads to primary point 2. Loot, spelled backwards, is tool, and that's all loot really is. What I like so much about Marathon is it's really an MMORPG in disguise, and the missions you're doing can often net better rewards than your current loadout, even if you fail to exfil while completing the mission. So after you get more experience in this game, you'll often find yourself saying, forget about these exfils, let's just ball out and complete this mission no matter what happened. Adopt the attitude that loot is just a tool to accomplish your missions, and you'll have a lot more fun in this game, and you'll progress much faster. Further, a major reason I play is collecting all the bits of lore on every single map, and these go into your codex. And within this codex, you can unlock many skins for both the weapons and the shells. In a recent stream, I played with nothing but the sponsored kit so I could unlock all the Arachne faction skins, and there are skins for every single faction in this method. So there are rewards beyond just the loot and the faction missions to pursue, and it's really up to you to decide what your grind of the day will be. Gear fear can be real, but I recommend limiting it to a few very special items in your vault. Looking into my vault as an example, you can see I have quite a few purple weapons here. Many of them have special effects. I'll describe this in a moment, but really, one of the weapons I care the most about is this Impact HAR, and this is a heavy ammo rifle. You're not really going to see this until you get to the later end of Dire Marsh, but the situation in which I came upon this rifle makes it really special to me, so it's been sitting in my vault, just kind of collecting dust, waiting for me to find the correct upgrades. And everything else down here, I'm willing to burn to get through the missions to improve this weapon and really a couple other weapons within my vault. And this brings me to core principle number 3. If the point of the game is survival, and loot is just a tool to help you survive, then the end game of survival is progressing your factions, and factions are everything in Marathon. Not only they're providing your missions, but each mission complete means rewards, with major contracts that's usually guns, shields, extra backpacks, and more. Further, the factions all have the upgrade tracks, which are the real secret sauce to sustainable loot. These upgrades will not only improve your shell's power, but environmental resistances, and unlock so many upgrades and free stuff in the Armory. This will just increase your average economy, which is core to running as many matches as possible in a day, because as a beginner, you're just limited by the amount of loot you have. You're probably going to be relying on the sponsored kits more often than not, and the gear within these is pretty weak. But at my level, I get free daily heals, both blue and green. I get some free daily weapons, such as this hardline PR. I even have a barrel mod for it. I could buy a magazine for it. If I level up a little bit more in my faction, I'll be able to get an optic for it. And with my current economy, my credit level is 250,000 plus. I usually hover around this credit level. That means I could put together loadouts that are a couple thousand without real consequence, but for someone who's a beginner, that is quite a bit of cash to put up front. And as a more advanced player, you can see I'm actually sitting on faction rewards for every single one of them. So if I do go down to 0, I can just come and claim these and build Hawk loadouts this way as well. Marathon is built in such a way that if you get through the early game grind, the famine suddenly becomes a big feast. With those 3 primary points in mind, let's talk about what you should actually do in your first game and first few levels of Marathon. And Marathon has bolstered the new player experience. Perimeter Beginner is solo only until level 12, so I recommend you utilize that new feature. Since you level up slower in solos, you'll have a few more rounds on the beginner map before you're put into the general population. There's a lot of items in Marathon, but the breakdown is pretty simple. You got your weapons, your ammo, your heals, and consumables as well, and grenades. These are going to be the primary things you're looking for off the bat because these are what allow you to fight. And keep an eye out for special weapons. These are the weapons that have the text behind them. You saw them in my vault earlier. They said things like bloodthirsty, enduring, materialist. And you can read what these do on the description of the items, and really they're just there to bolster the value of the weapons or of materials that you exfil out of the map. You'll find a lot of weapon mods and chips, as well as cores and implants that improve your shell all over the map. And this is a lot to read through as a beginner. I highly recommend that you exfil with as many of these as possible so you can compare them to each other within your vault. When it comes to the weapon chips, they can change your weapon functions in very dramatic ways, and the implants for your shell actually boost your stats a little bit, but they'll also have perks on them that don't really correspond to the name of the implant. So this requires a little bit of mixing and matching, preparing your loadout to get the maximum benefit. That's where you see the RPG lifeblood of Marathon start to come out. Beyond that, you'll also have the treasures and the salvage. And you should focus on the salvage first, because salvage is what's going to actually let you upgrade your factions. And as we've already discussed, the faction upgrades are super important. They're what actually give you access consistently to the good loot. And you should be collecting all of these if possible. They're mostly called unstables at the beginner level, and you may find some blues and purple stuff on perimeter, but it's very unlikely. You're mostly going to be finding green and white materials. And since all this stuff is very valuable to you, focus on fighting from safety and really just picking your fights carefully in general. Use this time to understand the mechanics, the physics of this game, because the Bungie physics are pretty unique. You're going to find that your shell is kind of bouncy, almost rubbery. Take some time to learn the map, find some spots you like, figure out some routes between the spots, and of course, mess around with the NPCs. Master the bot logic, because that's a huge part of this game as well. The importance of the bots, the UENC, does not taper off as the game progresses. If anything, they just become more powerful and more apparent. A large part of this is mastering the information game of Marathon, really the metagame aspect. As you learn what the sound effects in this game are, start paying real attention to them and noting what direction they're coming from on your compass. Are other players getting into fights with bots? Are you hearing in-game events getting activated? Exfils getting activated? When you come up to a spot for the first time, is it still the small recruit bots, or have they actually summoned reinforcements? Because that usually means a player has been active at that drop spot. Be more aware of sound in general, because it's definitely an underrated aspect of this game. I feel a large part of why newer players fail is because they play the game way too fast, running, clomping, putting themselves in bad situations against bots, bad positioning, and then ultimately more controlled players capitalize on their failures. As a general rule, just remember the faster you're going, the more noise you're producing, and the more risk you're taking. Now, there are some map events that you can do for better loot than you'll find in the regular boxes, and the easiest of these is going to be the data cache, so do not sleep on this. You'll find a blue card on a dead robot body, and you'll be tasked with finding a second blue card, which will ultimately take you to the destination of that final loot spot. Pretty simple, just pay attention if the other card starts to move, because that does mean another player has it. As you're moving around the map, you'll also see some flying bots with a box under them. These are Traxxas drones. These can have loot box keys in them. And as you pull up to some of these POIs, you'll see red flares over some of the buildings. This is where I recommend playing a particular hero, Thief, because Thief has a vision that shows you what color loot is inside the container. So using that ability, you can determine which loot box is actually worth opening. Occasionally, you'll see a wall safe, and you'll have to hack this. These usually have some lore items in them, but they will produce an alarm. And anytime you hear an alarm from something you're activating, yes, people in the area can also hear that alarm. It could give them incentive to push into you, so play these carefully. You'll also see hazard rooms which are full of gas, and the loot in these can be pretty good, but you risk damaging yourself with these. This is where you're going to utilize one of the consumables, a mechanics kit, and that will cure you of the poison effect. Pro tip, the mechanics kit is for most environmental hazards. And every round there's usually a secured resource, and this is a blue box that you hack, and it will summon bots when you do. So this is a bit more difficult to do solo, as it usually summons some mid-level bosses, and those ones utilize grenades. But this is probably the simplest path for a beginner player to get their hands on purple mods for weapons. And I'll use this to illustrate again that gear fear is kind of a deceptive mentality in this game, because once you learn the basic strategies, you'll see that taking a weapon from the bottom level to green, blue, and even purple is a relatively simple process. Outside of certain POIs, you'll have the supply drop, and this one will cause a drone to come down. It's going to drop 4 boxes for you. This one takes a while though, like 90 seconds to put the loot boxes on the ground. It produces a lot of noise, and everyone is going to know you're doing it, but it can offer you some huge benefits, like actual weapons that are already modded, really advanced heals. You can get self-revives and good shields out of these. Sometimes it's actual bunk. Sometimes it's one of the best loot drops on Perimeter, so I think it's worth the risk. Occasionally, if you're very lucky with that supply drop, you can get keys, and these keys will unlock vaults on the map. These also produce a lot of sound, and they're usually at the back end of a rat hole, so you can get pushed, and you really have nowhere to run when you activate these. I recommend taking some claymores, perhaps playing recon, since recon focuses on radar, and just trapping the heck out of these spots. They do produce a lot of sound when you open the door, but it's only for a short period of time. I think vault doors are relatively easy to do compared to the amount of loot you get out of them. And finally, there's 2 special events that happen on Perimeter that I don't think you'll be able to do as a beginner, and probably not be able to do solo. First, you have the Warden, and this is the toughest NPC boss on the map. It's always going to spawn in overflow, and you'll know if this spawns at the beginning of the game because you'll see yellow caution tape on that POI. As soon as you go into that spot and eliminate one bot, it's going to summon the Warden, and it's going to make the fight so much more intense. You're going to produce so much noise that everyone on the map is most likely going to head your way, because the Warden can actually drop the best loot on the map, period. And it can even drop keys for the final map in the game, Cryo Storage. Now, since this video is centered around beginners, I'm not going to go into real details about Cryo Storage, but just know you have to find some of the rarest drops in the game, and those are cryo keys, and you take those into cryo to unlock the vaults, which have further rare stuff like unique gold guns and weapons, gold shields. The second special event on Perimeter is the Intercept, and I honestly think the rewards for this aren't worth the time investment unless you're running a trio. This mission is going to ask you to bounce between 2 points of interest and then fight multiple levels of bots, and it might be outside of the realm of a beginner solo to do. So I'm just going to highly recommend you don't do this one, and if you do want to do this one, there are tutorials out there that you can find. Now let's talk about the Exfil, because what's the point of grabbing all this good loot if you can't actually make it out of the map? And exfilling solo can be tough. you're going to want to rely on mechanics like smoke grenades or even the assassin shell, which produces smoke himself. But there's also mechanics like the radar, and you have in-map mechanics that do this, but you could also utilize the recon shell, and this is going to let you know if anyone's creeping up on you. Ultimately, Marathon is a knowledge test, and the more knowledge you have before you try to exfil, the better you can plan for that moment. When you activate Exfil, there's going to be a small period before you can actually utilize it, so play in some cover, try to get high ground if you can, that way you'll have visibility on any of the people trying to snake you. And depending on what shell you play, it might actually be easier to go for a guarded Exfil, because even though it summons some high-level bots, depending on the distance from a POI, depending on the amount of people left in a map or the amount of time left in the match, it may be the safer option. And just remember, if you get downed but you're still alive and you manage to make it into the Exfil, you will make it out of the match, you will preserve your loot, and you'll finish your missions if they ask you to do an Exfil. Now, something to work on with Exfilling is your ultimate inventory value. And in the beginning, you'll be grabbing basic ingredients and weapon mods, but over time, you'll find that a full stack of treasures is often worth more than that mod that you're trying to take out with you. A major pro tip is to work on consolidating weapon mods. For example, I have this Bully SMG, and you'll notice below me that it has 4 mod slots. So before I exfil with a weapon like this, I'm going to make sure it's fully kitted out. Even if I have a mod that I'm not going to use, I'll put it on this weapon just so it's not taking space in my backpack. But also, if I have a 4-slot weapon and an 8-slot weapon, it's better to put an 8-slot weapon into your hands and put the 4-slot weapon in your backpack, because you'll conserve space, be able to pick up more treasures, and over time, you'll accrue more loot into your vault. Now you've got a few successful exfils under your belt, you've got some special weapons in the vault, and you've got a good stock of materials to upgrade your factions. The question is, what faction upgrades should you be aiming for? And it's going to take a little playtime before you unlock all the factions. That's why I recommend focusing on the main missions, because it's going to streamline your experience. It's going to fast track your ticket to the higher level loot. Now I have a whole video discussing this, but I'll give you a highlight of the most important upgrades I think. These are going to directly boost your runner shell and increase your survival potential in-game. The first faction, Cyber Acme, has a track that increases your heat, and your heat is essentially your stamina in Marathon. This will increase the number of movements you can make, whether that's sprinting and sliding. Your heat recovery will be faster, your generated heat will be less, and this means you can take more actions before your shell gets tired and becomes an easy target. New Caloric has a track right in the middle that will boost your environmental resistances, and in the very beginning, these are going to be kind of annoying, but with just a couple of upgrades, you'll find that dealing with these is much simpler. Through Traxxas, you can increase the power of your pings, and this does influence the recon shell, so if you're recon main, Traxxas is really the ticket, extending the ping area of effect and ping duration increase. Contributing to your movement speed, with Mida, you'll get an agility increase, which there's some misunderstanding about agility in this game. Agility is not your running speed. It is the speed at which you do your animations. And ultimately, that's what makes you faster. As you're doing parkouring, as you're jumping, as you're pulling out your weapons and reloading, all of those little bits are faster when your agility is increased. Arachne's survival upgrades are a bit more hostile, but still pretty good. Melee damage increase. This is going to allow you to deal with the basic bots in silence with just your knife. Finisher Siphon, this applies to players, and when you finish a player in a PvP scenario, you'll now get more life back. And this one is more for the trios, boosting your revive speed. I know a lot of people were hoping for a better solo experience in this game. That's why I've kind of focused the video more around that. In the future, I'm going to be doing a solo to millionaire run, so be sure to subscribe if this video has helped you out or you want to see that. But for the solo players, now is a very good time to be playing the game. This is kind of a tertiary upgrade. And finally, within Sekaguchi, and it's going to take you a bit to unlock this faction, this is the final one you unlock, you'll actually get an increase to your power cooldowns, both your tactical and your ultimate. And in the end, you can just start a match with your abilities completely full, which is incredibly powerful. One of the things that separates Marathon from other hero shooters, and yes, I do consider Marathon a hero shooter, is that the powers are incredibly subdued. You're not going to get them that many times in a round, and that's why I highly recommend picking 1 or 2 shells and really putting a lot of time into them so that using the powers becomes more of a muscle memory thing, because the more you have to actively think about it, the less likely you are to use those shells to their full potential. Now, the shell playstyles are pretty distinct, and they actually all have their own stats. This is going to affect movement speed, ability regeneration, stamina, and I think choosing your shell depends on what your goals are with Marathon. At the beginning, Thief is very powerful because of her loot vision, so I highly recommend her. You'll be able to find high-level ingredients and weapon mods very quickly and before your teammates if you're playing in trios. And you'll also be able to see if your enemies have high-level loot on them, which could often mean a shield if it's blue or if it's green, and you can decide whether or not you even want to take that engagement. Triage is the healer of the game, and he can put drones on your team and yourself. He mitigates a lot of the risk scenarios of this game, so I highly recommend him for beginners as well. Of course, you have the assassin, whose whole gimmick is about going invisible, probably the single best shell in a solo scenario, though the recon has been buffed and can actually spot the assassins pretty quick. So if you're more worried about the information game, if you're less about sneaking and more about finding the people for the confrontation, this might be your method. And some of these shells are going to be better in the beginning stages and kind of taper off. For example, now that I'm at a higher level, though I main the Thief, she probably represents 80% of my playtime in this game. Now that I'm within Outpost and Cryo Storage, I've really trended towards the Destroyer, because he's got a hard shield, he's got a very unselfish playstyle, his forward and backwards dashing is actually very beneficial for hallway fights, as opposed to a Thief who grapple hooks, or a Vandal who does a double jump, much better in vertical scenarios. But this is all things you'll pick up with time, with more experience. In the beginning, I recommend you pick 1 shell and learn them very deeply, because what shell you pick is actually going to inform what your loadout looks like. Using Thief as an example, because she has the grapple hook and can reach high ground much easier, I'm much more likely to use a sniper type weapon on this hero, or a shotgun type weapon on this hero, because she's very good at closing the distance, but also getting good at getting those high ground advantages. But I'm much less likely to use a regular AR or an LMG with her, because that puts her in a face-to-face confrontation, and it doesn't really benefit her power set. That's more the realm of a Destroyer, or a Vandal, or, surprisingly, even a Triage, because one of his traits is the battery overcharge, which actually boosts the performance of his weapons. Again, this is all stuff you'll learn with experience. You'll develop a playstyle over time, and that's a large part of succeeding within Marathon. I'll post-end that statement by saying, over time you'll also learn the difference between rare weapons and good weapons, because sometimes a weapon can cost a lot and not actually be very valuable in a fight. At the same time, a weapon can be incredibly common and also one of the most meta weapons. As an example, the Bully, in my opinion. The fact that you can silence this thing, you can put a drum mag on it, and you can put a special chip on it known as Circuit Tracer. And as you can see, Circuit Tracer reloads the weapon when you get eliminations, and this does include bots. So you'll find synergy within your playstyle, within your shell, within your weapon mods, and I'm not even going to dip into the implants because that's a whole other level of complexity that I'll cover in another video. But once again, that RPG aspect of Marathon really coming to the surface. That's where the juice is, my friends. That's where the quality of the game is, and I think that's where the people who really love Marathon, myself included, get obsessed with this game. Moving on to the Armory, and this is a large reason why I told you to focus on the faction missions and exfilling as much salvage as possible. Because as we already discussed, upgrading your factions is going to give you access to free rewards within the store for every single faction. Most importantly, the priority access track, which we did illustrate how to build this hardline PR for pretty much nothing at my economy level. But this priority access is for every single faction. Free grenades from Mida, that's where I got the free shotgun from the Arachne. With Sekaguchi, they're just going to give you some free mods here. I haven't even done my upgrades for this yet. Hilarious. But once you start progressing past the basic faction upgrades, Like this one only requires green rod, unstable gunmetal, but this one over here requires blue wire. And then this one over here requires purple upgrades that will probably take a few dozen hours of gameplay to actually acquire. But once you're at that level, you're going to have an excess of these basic ingredients. And if you take them to the Armory, every faction has rewards available for these crafting ingredients. Example, I have 149 unstable lead, and for 2 lead, I can get 40 heavy rounds, which go into the bully, the silence bully build I showed you earlier. And this is why even if you lose your good stuff in this game, it's still worth it to run it back on these sponsored kits, even an enhanced sponsored kit, and just go for the crafting materials, because the crafting materials are going to provide you all kinds of rewards. Granted, this takes a neurochem pack to get a blue shield. Pretty expensive. But I could get a blue shield, I could get some blue heals, I get some green heals, and of course, within Traxxas, I could even get myself a partially kitted bully for only a few altered wire. So unless you found some really good weapons or mods, unless your backpack is just stuffed to the brim with treasures, it's always going to be worth your time to exfil with these materials. And even further, something that Bungie just added to this game is the carry system. And when you do the faction missions with other players in a crew, that means a pre-made squad. You'll get quote-unquote carry points, and these can be used for more rewards, blue backpacks, more shields, and even more faction reputation to get more upgrades within those factions, to get more free loot within your armory, to get more of the ranked rewards, just free guns on free guns on free guns. And I say all of this to illustrate that people have mischaracterized how brutal Marathon can be from a loot perspective. In the beginning levels, it's a bit of famine. And yes, the PvP in this game can be pretty intense, but the comeback is very simple if you know what you're doing. And that's why I made this video, to help all you beginner players, all you new players, understand exactly how to get all this good weaponry as simply as possible. And now for some general gameplay tips, and while each of these could truthfully be their own video, it'll take a bit of practice and experience before you truly understand the nuances of these points, but I can at least illustrate the type of things you should focus on match to match. First is to respect the pacing of the game. Some people have an inclination to move very fast, but some people also move too slow through their engagements. Extraction shooters at their heart are really just battle royales, but slower paced and with more dramatic consequences. So finding that balance between taking out the NPCs, establishing your own defensive zone, but also being careful around other players and taking your fights, with intelligence, that's going to be a skill gap that you'll develop. Bridging to the next point, that the more you understand the game, the less pressure you'll have in every match. In the beginning of the game, there's an information overload, and you can't see too far from yourself. You're so focused on the loot in your inventory, the bots in front of you, learning the drop spots, that you're not paying attention to the metadata, the sounds going on around the map, player movements. And with open world PvP games, information is everything. So work on developing your information tonnage, your ability to understand what's coming into your senses and deciphering it into an actionable game plan. Because all your information informs the next key point, and it's your positioning, because positioning is everything in a fight. This is far too nuanced a subject to really go into detail with this video. I'll have to do a video on this in the future. But I'm not just talking about the angles at which you take your fight, but also the height, the macro positioning on the map, how you approach the POIs given the information you know. Heck, even the using the bots to your advantage in a firefight if you properly understand their logic and how to move them around, how to avoid them. And there's even your positioning within the team, as I illustrated earlier. If I'm a thief, I might have a sniper and be in the back. If I'm a destroyer, I might have an LMG and be in the front of the group. Another big tip is learning when to apply pressure and learning when to retreat. Because when you get a hole in this game, putting as much pressure as possible is often very rewarded. But if you give people too much time to recover, they'll often swarm over you. But then sometimes a fight is lost, and knowing that the fight is lost as soon as possible means one of your teammates can retreat, hopefully survive, and actually get the res. Think of it from this perspective. The other team can only loot as much as they carry, and if you run into a squad that's better equipped, they're probably not going to want to take most of your stuff. So even if you lose a fight, coming back and actually getting that exfil puts you ahead of the curve. Focus on developing consistent strategies and techniques, because a game like this is all about statistics. It's all about results over time. Master Marathon's sandbox, master the information game, master the synergy between your shell, the weapons, and your teammates, and your chances of success are going to skyrocket. You're going to do way better in this game, not only as a beginner, but further on into the intermediate and even advanced realms. We're fast approaching Season 2 of Marathon, but it is still so worth it to grind for the Cryo Archive and try to face the final boss, this Fit Compiler. And if you don't manage to face him before the end of the season, just know, the whole point of this game is to unlock the vaults in the Cryo Archive, and every time you unlock those vaults, you will get one AI subroutine based on that vault. And it unlocks a codex entry. As long as you have the codex entry unlocked, you don't have to do that same vault next season. So fighting the final boss of Marathon, you can take it at your pace. There's no reason you have to do it all in one season. There's no reason you have to do it in the first week like content creators or streamers may make you feel like you're pressured to do. You can play this game over the next couple of seasons with your boys at your own pace. Just set a goal. And as long as you have the goal in mind, that's really what's kept me so obsessed with this game. In my mind, I know that I am going to beat that compiler. And since I've already done my first Cryo Archive run, I think I can get it before the end of this season. And if you hustle, maybe you can get there as well. Comment down below, how are you feeling about the state of Marathon? Are you a new player? Are you a more advanced player? The mission statement of this channel is superhero gaming, and that means doing super heroic things in the realm of gaming. In my mind, beating the compiler is something that most gamers will never achieve, and that means we gotta get it done. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to teach you guys how you can do it as well. So be sure to subscribe and maybe check out these videos next to me. One of them is about the best faction upgrades, like I told you, going into further detail about what you should focus on to improve your shell's power level. And the other one is about my first Cryo Archive run. It went very well. I did it out of nowhere for no particular reason because I had a good loadout and we absolutely dominated that map.